Alright, so Invincible. Fuck, man, I'm still traumatized. Or excited. Or just restless. I mean, this has been me pretty much ever since I started watching it a couple of weeks ago. And then as soon as I finished it, I tore through the comic and it was also absolutely incredible. But after reading the comic, I was a little torn between the two different portrayals of Omni-Man. Look, don't get me wrong here. I absolutely adored the comic and the series. But I thought that Nolan's character was worth cross-examining because by doing so, you get an interesting look into the effects of how a writer can tell a story most effectively through different media. In effect, we're going to go slightly meta. But don't worry, I won't be spoiling anything story-wise past the end of the TV series, and the series is pretty faithful. I'm basically just going to be making some comparisons and talking about the effects of it, and showing some memes. If you've only watched the series, you're still safe here story-wise, unless of course you're a die-hard spoiler purist, in which case get off the internet forever before someone spoils the daily news for you. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin. A tale of... Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I get into that, hi, my name is Salad. Why my name's Salad? I don't know. Probably because I'm full of nutrients and if you eat me, you could gain superpowers, kids. Hey, no, what the f***? Get off me, it was just a joke. The inside of all of your mouths need therapy. Anyway, as I was saying before, without further ado, let's begin. A tale of two Omni-Men. It is a period of civil war between two Viltrumites on planet Earth. Well, actually, Mark's dad is just an asshole and he's decided to destroy everything to conquer planet Earth. He'll even tear his son apart to do it. In fact, turns out that he sees his wife as nothing more than a chihuahua. But we as viewers and readers have been subjected to two slightly different retellings of this tale. Retellings that profoundly affect the implications for Omni-Man's character and what this might mean for the perception of his character going forward in the story. He's still a Okay, so Invincible was crazy, even though Mark is anything but invincible. I imagine that was the point because, dog, this brother gets battered so consistently and fails so often he might as well have just stayed at home and used his superpowers to become a world table tennis champion or something. Man, this guy is the worst superhero ever. But his worst battering has to come at the hands of his father because whilst Battleby served him in new muscle, his dad beat his emotions to a pulp at the same time. But let's rewind to the end of episode 1. Here is a live reenactment of me watching that scene for the first time. What in the actual living is going on here? No, I like that fish guy. His head was funny. Black Batman, no! They done killed all my homies, man. Omni-Man done killed them and I gotta watch the next episode right now. The thing is, once that episode was done, the question of why Omni-Man had committed his actions was split into like 4 parts. 1, why did he do what he did? 2, what did the Guardians do to prompt this? 3, is he being controlled? And 4, how are his family and friends going to react? Maybe more than that, but I'm just riffing off the top of my head and I know I'm a purple monkey and I'm beautiful, but I'm not perfect, so fuck you. And when you watch it for the first time, all of these things are spinning in your head at once, leading to the response that most of us have had that I have to binge watch this thing right now. And as you watch through it and watch the story unfold, each of these questions falls away one by one until you're just left by the end with a single question. Why did he do it? And the problem with presenting it like this is that it's not likely really to be a good reason. In fact, it's almost guaranteed to come off as an excuse, and the excuse is likely to be somewhat iffy.
To show them how wrong they are, how pointless it is, that they can be a part of something bigger. Or die.
This is just how it goes in most stories if you slowly unravel a hidden personal motivation of a character over time, rather than saving all the information for a big reveal, or as much as is necessary. A good twist is different because all of a sudden, bam, Kaiser Soze is Kevin Spacey's character the whole time at the end of The Usual Suspects, or bam, again, Kevin Spacey put Brad Pitt's wife's head in the box at the end of 7.
Oh, what's in the box?
Which both of them are pretty fitting characters for Kevin Spacey to play because he's absolute scum in real life too. I spoiled them here so you don't watch his films anymore, sue me. But when the mystery is why has this person done this, especially with something that intense from a main character, then it becomes really hard to maintain that initial feeling that drove you to keep watching relentlessly in the first place. For comparison's sake, let's look at Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, which by the way is the best book in the film in the series, and if you disagree you can argue with your father. Don't actually do that, he's probably a really nice guy. Sirius Black is out to kill Harry, of which, by the way, another nemesis, Harry? 3 books, 3 nemesises? If I was him, I would have smoked a hell of a lot more gillyweed than he did over the course of the series. But I digress. We're told that Sirius is the bad guy and that he snaked Harry's parents, and the whole film revolves around people trying to protect Harry from Sirius's murderous plot. But like, as a reader or viewer, you kind of know that there has to be something more to it, because imagine your friend was like, finish my homework for me, and you were like, fuck yeah, I love homework, so I'm going to break out of the world's hardest prison to break out of, and I'm the only one to do it ever, by the way, making me practically a genius, and then I go on the run from literally every wizard ever, but not just wizards, also a bunch of rogue flying demon things that would suck my soul out of my ass crack if that was the only option they were given, and I literally have no one in the world because Voldemort isn't even alive. He's a demon baby head on the back of a non-Sikh Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher who wears a turban for non-religious reasons because it's just another thing to add to the list of insensitive things that Professor Quirrell does, although turbans could have a completely different connotation in the wizarding world. Plus, he mainly wore it because he's an asshole trying to hide the literal Dark Lord and not to monetize or glamorize a part of minority culture for profit. So I'm not even sure if that counts as cultural appropriation. And is Voldemort even on the back of his head at this point? I swear he got turned into dust at the end of the first Harry Potter film. I've got off topic. Anyway, he goes through all of that and his only thought is, yeah, I'm gonna complete my friend's homework and I'm not even getting a shiny Charizard card out of it. Nah, that's poor motivation by any stretch. Stock villain nonsense at its worst, and even J.K. Rowling herself has been a better antagonist in real life on her Twitter feed. For fuck's sake. The point is, even if you didn't consider all of that whilst watching it, there is still a load of mysteries that are maintained. How did Sirius actually escape Azkaban? Why did he snake Harry's parents? Where is he now? Although, of course, you expect him to be coming to Hogwarts where Harry's is, but it's still a question in your mind. But then, of course, once we do meet Sirius, we find the answer to all of these things at once. Peter Pettigrew is the real snake here, or more importantly, a rat. Get it? Sirius is innocent and he's been driven by revenge for 12 years in like the worst place of all time. That's pretty good motivation and good mystery upkeep. In Invincible though, they didn't really manage to upkeep the feeling of mystery for me over the course of the TV series. The fact that Omni-Man did it has to be revealed for the other characters over the course of the series somehow, so there are only 2 real routes for his character to take. 1, how long could he keep up with enacting this plan and getting away with it before somebody finds out? Or 2, how long before the people trying to find the answer as to why he did what he did actually find that answer if they're searching for one? And so Mark's mum in the series becomes a detective, so to speak, so that she can find out for herself. And Damien Darkblood's also searching for answers and actually confirms it to Cecil, although he already knew at the time, that Omni-Man was the culprit by episode 4. And then there were strong implications from Omni-Man himself that he was the culprit in episode 5. So by the time he reveals his answer as to why he did what he did to Mark in the last episode, we already have context for 3 out of 4 of the questions that I mentioned earlier. Number 1, why did he do what he did? Well, he's about to tell us. Suspense. 2, what did the Guardians do to prompt this? Well, we aren't exactly sure, but we can be pretty certain that Nolan killed them because he was on a power trip. It'd be your own homies, man. 3, is he being controlled? No. I mean, you could answer yes because of the Viltrumite mission, but you're also probably the type of person who eats chocolate until you feel sick, and then when you're asked why you ate all of that chocolate, you said your uncle told you once that it had vegetable fats in it, so if you eat enough of it, it may as well be healthy. 4, how are his family and friends going to react? Well, that's been answered too over the course of the episodes before he talks to Mark, so that's not exciting anymore either. Let me not front and say that it wasn't worth watching all the way up until this point because it was still absolutely awesome, but pretty much all the mystery had been expended. All that was left really was something that was more than likely going to feel like an excuse. And it did feel like an excuse. And let's be real, it was a shit excuse. Strip away all of the theatrics, as fucking awesome as they were, and his excuse was basically, they told me to? I didn't want to, but like, they told me to 20 years ago and I'm super loyal, so I started a family here, knowing my son was likely to get powers, but then once he did, I got scared and the only thing I could think to do was smack the absolute shit out of him and run him through a train. Right, Omni-Man. Very poignant. Real thinker you are, mate.
Think, Mark!
But see, the graphic novel handles this whole section differently. When Mark first gets his powers, Nolan doesn't seem to give even the slightest offense. Like, you read for like 7 chapters before Omni-Man kills the Guardians, and it's not as shocking as the scene at the end of the first episode. because it's not as visible, graphic, or even as strongly emphasised, because the Guardians of the Globe are only mentioned in passing before the chapter in which they're killed. And then the first time you meet them is just before they're subsequently murdered, which, if you compare it to episode 1 of the show, in which they're shown as part of a team with Omni-Man at the very beginning of the series, and then the show spends about 10 minutes contextualising them properly before killing all of them brutally. So it's much more impactful when watching it in the show. Although, to be fair, the comic book is still graphic as a but that's just comic books, you know? I'm not trying to delve into all of my childhood trauma with comic books right now, just because I think I might die every time I read some Junji Ito, or Jeepers Creepers always seems to give me a new onset of chronic diarrhea every time I watch it, even though that's a film. You know, it took me 5 tries to get through that film? Do you know how much underwear needed to be replaced because of this? Do you have any idea how many years I thought some alien was coming for me after the first time I watched Event Horizon? Any idea? Jesus, I need therapy. Anyway, the point is, that scene at the end of episode 1 is so impactful, but the comic didn't pack that much of a punch, and truthfully, I think that's because it didn't need to or intend to. The end of episode 1 was presented in that way for the shock value of the moment as well as storytelling, but I would just like to emphasize here that shock value isn't inherently a cheap tactic, and this scene itself is proof of it. In fact, I personally believe that if this scene wasn't as shocking as it was, many people would have just given up on the show before completing the season, which is a luxury that comic books tend to have over television, because comic book fans are much less of a general audience and are much more likely to give a story time to flesh itself out properly without feeling like they're having their time wasted. I would say this is because we're the elite amongst the human monkey species, but I'm also aware that times are changing and monkeys generally have less of an attention span than they did 20 years ago when the original comic was released. So to be honest, it just feels like a much better decision for effectively delivering the story in the modern day. I mean, 7 chapters of the issue is 7 months worth of releases, and by the time that Nolan leaves the planet, it's been chapter 13, which is a year and a bit's worth of releases, and no one is going to watch an episode of a TV show month by month to get to that point to keep their interest. So, you know, what had to be done had to be done. But by the comic book not being as shocking in the process of killing the Guardians, the eventual fight between Mark and his father before Nolan leaves the planet feels much closer to the event of killing the Guardians in the TV series in terms of gravity, in the sense that it really feels like it serves as the main springboard for the rest of the story. Mark getting battered is by far the most shocking moment of the comic at that point, and whilst this approach prevents the feeling of mystery regarding Nolan's actions against the Guardians from being as prominent, it also prevents them from eventually feeling subdued and unfortunately slightly disappointing by the time that Nolan explains himself to Mark. Mark's mum, Debbie, barely plays a part in this segment of the story of the comic, and even Damien Darkblood is much more of an afterthought than anything, the poor guy. Anyway, even with all of that said, the trade-off for the changes in Nolan's portrayal were mostly redeemed by a couple of really standout moments. One of them being the scene where Mark gets absolutely torn in new by Battle Beast, the absolute goat. But my favourite thing about that scene isn't even Mark getting sent to the fucking Shadow Realm, it's Nolan's presence at the scene. In fact, I think this moment alone was what prevented me from actively disliking the handling of Nolan's character as a whole in the TV adaptation, because it showed him sticking to the plan but being a bit more sly about it in a way that I didn't clock at first until I rewatched the series. At first, I thought that he didn't help Mark out because he was disappointed or was even scared that Mark had got his powers now and thought it might be simply easier if he was dead.
I can't help but think maybe our lives would be better if he hadn't gotten them at all.
But I realised on a rewatch that he was essentially enacting phase 2 of his plan. Of course he wanted Mark alive. His conflict with Mark in the final episode was that he was explaining to him what it meant to be a Viltrumite, and he felt that he had made a mistake by raising him as a human and wanted to explain what he thought a Viltrumite's true responsibility was, something that he hadn't been able to teach him all of the time that Mark had been living with him and his mother. So, with that in mind, once he had killed the Guardians of the Globe, Omni-Man then killed them, and the only potential threat to him was the teen team. So, the way that I understood it was that his goal was to take them out. So, Cecil receives an anonymous phone call about the situation, and then all Nolan had to do was make sure that Mark didn't die. And he only left the scene once he saw that Mark was being treated for his injuries. Another proper standout moment was the whole episode with the big Cthulhu thing that he had to fight because Cecil set it on him. But just before even that moment, he destroyed the hammer in the sky, which is really similar to the same thing in Gears of War, but I digress, which led to the absolute best line of the entire series, hands down.
$400 billion for the world's most expensive nosebleed.
Oh, that is so f***ing ill, man. I know this whole channel is dissecting stuff generally, but sometimes things are just f***ing awesome for the sake of it.
お前はもう死んでいる。何?
Anyway, if you ask me, the series as a whole is a triumph. There were so many great moments in the show that I adored. One of my favourites being when Machine Head goes,
I know where your family lives.
because the tone of it was hilarious and it had me belly laughing for about 5 minutes. And of course when Mark gets ran through a train at the end, which is just so f***ing savage, Jesus Christ. But the point that I want to make here is what about the presentation of the story and the effects that timing, pacing and the differences between different media can make on a character. There's a good chance actually that Robert Kirkman realised that by making this series, he had an opportunity to rewrite parts of the comic that he thought maybe could be better in retrospect, which would be more than valid. In the comics, for example, the stuff with Robot becoming Kid Rex, the whole sequence thing on Mars, which by the way was hilarious, and the part with Machine Head and Battle Beast all happen after Nolan leaves the planet, but they probably work better placed at this point in the story, aside from what it means for Nolan's reveal. Also, Amber is black now, which is cool, I guess. I don't entirely know why they did that, aside from trying to be more inclusive, but hey, I'll take it. In my opinion though, for the changes in the story to work as effectively as possible, Nolan's reasoning has to be much more earth-shattering than, I'm on a power trip because I was told I have to be. Don't ask me what that reasoning would be though, because I'm not about to rewrite the whole series. Fuck it, go on then. We'll call this segment, Salad didn't write the Invincible comic or the TV series, but he's going to talk about what he thinks would have been most effective in the TV show as though he were a professional story writer or something. Okay, go. In episode 1, I would mostly keep it the same, although I may have changed some of Nolan's worried reactions to ones of nonchalance in this episode and throughout the series, as to maintain Nolan as a stoic character who still believes in what he's doing until Mark says, I would still have you, after getting beaten into another dimension at the end by his father, which is the moment that makes him fully realise what he's done. It's only after episode 1 in which I would personally have made a couple of key changes to the story to maintain the feeling of suspense throughout the series. First off, I would not have had Mark's mum do her little detective thing, and instead I would have had her as a much less prominent character, like she is in the comics, so that she could be caught completely off guard by Cecil teleporting to come and take her to the headquarters, before at that moment then learning about Nolan by watching him fuck shit up with Cecil and the Cthulhu monster. She probably wouldn't have stood around mostly peacefully as she does, but having her come to that realisation at that time instead of having suspected and investigated him the entire time would have been a much more impactful moment for her character, as her whole world would flip upside down at once. Secondly, I would have nobody alert Nolan to the fact that he's under investigation or has been found out by his wife or Damien Darkblood until the scene in episode 7 when he finds out that Cecil's investigating him because of the house across the road. And I would have Damien Darkblood removed entirely from the show. Darkblood's main role in the series is pretty much just to inform Mark's mother that Nolan is the most likely suspect, although he may be relevant later on in the TV series as shown by that scene in the closet at the end of episode 4, and in that case I would have him explore Nolan's house when nobody is there, rather than talking to Debbie as he does, and maybe even being the one who finds Nolan's beaten up uniform and gets it analysed, although of course it would mean that Nolan would have to be an absolute dunce by leaving evidence around, but you know, you can work out the small details. He then takes that uniform to Cecil as proof, who then proceeds to exercise the shit out of Damien Darkblood anyway for potentially warning Nolan through his actions. In fact, he could get tipped off towards the uniform by the way that Nolan reacted to wanting that uniform back, like Debbie did, which is what makes him sneak into the house and then or steal it some other way or replace it, or this is a fictional world, you can put whatever you want in here. And then Cecil can show that uniform to Debbie as proof in the headquarters once he teleports her over there to help her understand that Nolan is on absolute smoke. By presenting it this way, Nolan can keep up his facade to the other characters and his reasoning for his actions from the viewer until a much bigger reveal at the end. Thirdly, I understand that most of the decisions taken regarding showing Nolan's character were to show that he was somewhat in doubt about what he had to do, but I would have him almost always express these moments alone and in silence. So, for example, A hypothetical short scene where he's at home alone and looks at a picture of his family, which makes him drop his expression slightly somewhere in the middle of the series before putting the picture down again and then going about his business, would have the same effect, or the same kind of effect in fact, except it wouldn't show him as conflicted throughout the series. Instead, these kind of moments would be up for interpretation until context is given. The context being that he's becoming slightly aware at what it is that he was having to give up, but still believed in his mission, which allows for the scene at the end when Mark says, "I will still have you," to really take him aback and make him realise the error of his ways and how important his family was in that moment. Then we don't have the whole "I think I wanted you to find it" malarkey about his costume, before then destroying Chicago, calling his wife a pet, and then proceeding to batter the shit out of his son anyway. I think that Nolan would have been a much more effective character if he was shown as a covert operative who thoroughly believed in his mission for 20 years and then only began to realise what that truly meant once he began to enact his plan. His decisions at the end and that whole sequence would have made much more sense if he truly believed in the Viltrumite cause, but hadn't fully realised that he had been changed by his time on Earth. His feelings of regret, I think, would have been much more impactful in that instance, once he realised that he had changed and his decision to leave the planet would be one of running due to strong internal conflict and confusion at how he felt, rather than his storyline of wavering indecision that then led to him giving in to how he truly felt at the end. In the comic, Nolan goes to cock back another punch but can't bring himself to land it before flying off into space, and I think this visually shows his struggle much more clearly, because right now it's as though he knew the whole time that he didn't want to conquer Earth, but he did it anyway because he was scared, maybe, of the Viltrumites. He believed in his cause but also not really. Truthfully, it's unclear, and if you ask me, I wouldn't be able to tell you definitively. Hey, maybe it's all of those things. I mean, it still works, just not as well as I feel that it could have. With that said, let me take those 4 questions that I asked earlier and apply them to my story changes, assuming that we're watching from the point when Nolan has found out that he's been rumbled. Number 1, why did he do what he did? Well, he's about to tell us. 2, what did the Guardians do to prompt this? Well, since we don't know the answer to the questions 1 or question 3, which I haven't said just yet, but you've heard it a couple times previously in the video yet, we don't know what the Guardians did or if they did anything at all. We would have no answers as to Nolan's motivations and only hints that would make sense in hindsight. 3, is he being controlled? He isn't, but again, we don't have this answer until episode 7 when things start to get revealed. 4, how are his family and friends going to react? Well, Debbie's just completely lost her. How is she going to take in that information overload in the next season? To be fair to Mark's character, he wouldn't need to change all that much, if at all, for this to work, but as we know, he seems okay-ish by the end of the series, but is that really it? Also, how's Nolan going to feel about all of this once he starts sorting through his feelings, considering that it was conflicting feelings and indecision that made him leave the planet, rather than him trying to convince himself that he was doing the right thing? Well, can season 2 just come out last week? With all of that said though, I do want to reiterate, I loved the series. I love the comic too. There are things that each one does better than the other, which kind of means that there's no definitive version of the story of Invincible, but it also means that, in this case, it's worth consuming both, which is very rare for an adaptation. Don't ever watch the Percy Jackson films, ever. Read the books instead, trust me, unless you want to live a cursed life like when Voldemort drank the unicorn blood and still ends up as a demon baby on the back of a head of the world's most confused man anyway. So, if anything, just consider this video a promo piece for the comic. Read it now, if all you've seen is the series, and go and live your best life. I'm rooting for you. Just, even though you're taking in a lot of Omni-Man's antics, don't apply too much of his antics to your own life. I haven't checked recently, but I'm pretty sure that beating your own child within an inch of his life is pretty illegal. As fuck.